Okay, we're holding the bottom of the page. Let's bring it up. Hold on. Bottom of 2B. Okay. So we were learning about Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah was the one who answered that he answered before, prior to where we're holding now. I'm just gonna go back a second from last week, that the distance between Mechamton to Tveria is 1 mile. Like I posted on the group, Mechamton, till today, there's a national park called Chamton, I think Chamton National Park, which is I guess it's going south on the Kinneret. So therefore, I guess it's about 2.5 kilometers. So a mile is about a kilometer. So what did we say? 1,200 meters. So it would be a little bit south of the city of Tveria now. That's what Rabbi Steinzalt said, that where Tveria is today is a little bit north of the original Tveria, which was a bit more south, which is, I guess, towards the Tzomot Tzomach. Until today, the national park where they have the hot springs today, the Tveria, the Chame Tveria is about 2 kilometers or so from the city of Tveria. Okay, all fascinating places worth the visit. Now that we're mentioning Rabbi Yirmiyah, the Gemara continues. Rabbi Yirmiyah, something about Rabbi Yirmiyah that he taught seemingly nothing to do. Obviously, everything has to do, but seemingly nothing to do with what we just said before. Rabbi Yirmiyah, v'itema Rabbi Chia bar Abba, and other people say that it wasn't even Rabbi Yirmiyah, but it was Rabbi Chia bar Abba, like in the previous statement. That man sapach tsoifim amuram. Man sapach again are the letters that are doubled in the Hebrew alphabet, which we have mem, nun, tzadik, pei, and chaf. All those letters have two letters: the open mem, closed mem, the regular nun, long nun, the regular tzadik, the long tzadik, the regular fei, pei, and the long fei, and the chaf and the long chaf. So tsoifim, the visionaries, the prophets, so to say, are the ones who taught us about the double letters. And the reason why they're not in order, because tzaddik is the last, would be the number 90, and pei is 80. So it should start with chaf, which is the number 20, is because in the word man sapach is the word sofim. Tzaddik pei comes first, so tsofim, although the mem is on this other side. But it's the hint that the letters of man sapach were said by the people who the prophets, seers. So Man Tzapach, Rashi says, Kofel Oisius, those who, the double languages, Tzafim Amurim Nevi Adoires. Okay. We'll just go quickly through all the commentaries. The Rashba asks, how's it possible that the manner in which these letters are written was forgotten after all the Torah scroll written by Moshe? Okay, so I'll just say, we learned these comments from Rabbi Steinzalt, from Rabbi Evan, that the Rashba says, why didn't they just check? They had a Torah that Moshe wrote. The Torah that Moshe wrote was hidden by the king Yeshayahu, which we're going to learn about in a second. And the king Yeshayahu, when he hid the ark, he hid with it the Torah, so they didn't have the Torah. Although there's other questions, but they had tefillin, they had other things, they had other places that they could have checked that had double letters. They have over here. It says that it's brought down. Who says it over here? There was the Urim V'Tumim. There was the tefillin that they had at the time. So he says, so he said this, V'Tispra. How could you say that the seers are the ones who introduced the double letters? See, there's two types of letters. There's you see that's kind of mixing things up. There's what's called double letters and closed and open letters. For some reason, the Talmud kind of goes in and out about that in its questions. Means we have, what are the absolute closed letters? When we say closed, means absolutely closed. There's no little opening, because there's some people that have the tradition that the samach, there's a discussion if the samach, if the samach should be 100% closed or just open a little bit on the top, like a circle with a little opening on the top. So we see from here clearly that according to the Gemara, the samach has to be a very absolute closed letter, like a circle or circle shaped. The mem also, the second mem of the 5 double letters, the second mem is a closed letter, but the other double letters are not closed. Closed means that there's a circle, there's an inside space that has no access to the outside space, which is the question of how those letters stood in the tablets. If the letters went through and through, there's nothing to hold that circle that is in the inside of the samach or the closed mem. So he says like this. V'tispra, first the Gemara asks a question. Do you want to say that the seers are the one that introduced the double letters? That means that there was no such thing as double letters before the seers, and they introduced something new, which was the double letters, similar to what Aaron was asking yesterday. The fact that the Torah says either there's a machlekes, what verse are we referring to? So Reb Steinzas quotes Leviticus, means Vayikra also ends Elad Dvarim, right, at the end of the curses. But also there's Elad Dvarim also, it says at the end of Vamidbar, the book of Numbers. But either verse basically closes out to say that these are the mitzvahs that the Torah, that were given from God to Moshe, and that's it. Because Dvarim is repetitive. It's Mishnah Torah, it's called the second Torah. It means to say that Moshe repeated the laws that he taught before. So that's why it makes more sense to say the Eila Mitzvahs is referring to the final pasuk in Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, at the end of Bamidbar. But from this either one, we learn She'ein Navi Rashi L'Chadish Davar Mi'ata. A prophet can't introduce anything new. So how would the prophet introduce double letters if they didn't exist before? Void Vam Reb Chizda Mem V'Samach Shmaluchais. And this we were holding. The Reb Chizda says that the Mem and the Samach letters in the tablets, means on the luchos abris, he says b'nei sayoimdim, they stood miraculously. What does it mean miraculously? Because if they were perforated through and through, so the circle was empty. There's no, because if the open space would be just the circle, then it would just be a circle. You would just see an open hole. You wouldn't see the letter samach. So it had to have the filling inside the circle, and there's nothing to hold onto that filling because it's totally sealed. Therefore, we learn from this that if the samach would have a little bit of an opening, even a drop on the top, I think some people have it written on I think there's a picture here, if I could bring it up. I think some people have the idea that over here, see over here, there's a little opening on the samach. Some people feel that the samach was written like that there was some sort of opening over here, or I think, on the top as well. But that's obviously can't be, because then that little opening would be the point that holds on to the filler. So from here we see, but what we do see from here is that the closed mem, which is seemingly the second mem, was there in the tablet. So how could you say the prophets or the seers introduced something that was there already? So Rashi says, "B'nesa yomdim." What does it mean that those letters were miraculous? Shahoisa chikikasan mishnei evereim. That it was carved all the way to the other end of the luchos, of the tablets. Hilkoch shara oisei seish makom davek. The other letters has any open space to hold on to. So therefore, it's not a miracle. I mean, you could take it all the way through, and whatever the open space is being held on to, it's a maze. There's what to hold on to. Elamem, which is the closed mem, like over here, and the samach, the closed samach over here, this little gray part over here, peish part, has nothing to hold on to if it goes all the way through. It stood miraculously in the air. V'dafke b'stumim, that obviously only applies to the closed letters. So here the Gemara could have answered. That's not really an argument, because Reb Chizda is only telling us that there was a closed mem, but there's another four letters that we still have the chaf and the fei and the nun and the tzaddik. So the other four letters, that's no proof that they existed. So the Gemara could have answered that Reb Chizda holds there was only four letters introduced by the seers, and Rabbi Yirmiyah says all five were introduced by the seers. But it's not such an argument. So the Gemara could have answered Hach Brayser Reb Chizda b'stumim. Reb Chizda is only talking about the closed letters, that we know there was a closed mem, but the other four are not closed. And maybe Rabbi Yirmiyah is saying yes, the double mem was always there, but the other four were introduced by the seers. And seemingly that in the Talmud Shabbos feels that's the difference between the two opinions. But the Gemara figured and rather ask a question that could have fit with the full statement, which is that all 5 letters were introduced by the seers, and then there's a question: how did the closed mem be introduced? How was it introduced by the seers if it existed already on the tablets? So let's see what Reb Steinzad says. The letters appearing in the tablets of the covenant were engraved into the stone, and there is in a tradition that the engraving went all the way completely through the tablet, means all the way to the other side. Most of the letters are not closed, and therefore the portions of the stone that remain after the engraving were attached to the rest of the stone. However, since the letter samach is closed 100%, the part of the stone inside the letter could only have remained in place by way of miracle. Means how did that piece stand there? As it was not attached to the rest of the tablet. The same is true to the letter mem. When it appears in the end of a word, this statement of Rav Chizda indicates that the form of mem, as it appears at the end of the word, was already established at Sinai. So how could he say that the seers are the one who introduced the double letters? Again, I just want to bring down. He says. Give me 1 second. He just quotes based on this Gemara, the Rashba, Shlomo ben Aderet, in one of his responses says, from here we see that unlike what I showed you before, that the samach has an opening, the samach has to be completely closed. Because if it has an opening, then Reb Chizda's statement wouldn't hold water, because the samach would be not miraculous, but holding onto that little opening. So the Gemara says like this. You're right. Mihava havu, they did exist. We didn't know how to put them. It means today we have the tradition that 90% is a few times that doesn't have it. La Misra, for instance, where you have the closed mem in the middle of a word, but we know from this that these 5 letters have to be at the end of the words. They're final letters. And the visionaries, the seers, set it up that the double letters are at the end of, that means the second letter is at the end of a word. Psuchim be'emtza teva, ustumim b'seif teva. So this is the question. Why do we call psuchim and stumim? The other 4 letters are not closed letters, they're just long letters, but the Gemara calls them closed letters. But either way, when he says stumim, he means the last 5, the 5 double letters are at the end of a word, and the open letters, what he calls the small letters, are at the beginning or middle of the word. Okay, so the Gemara says, "Mihava, you're right. They did exist." His teacher learned that the Gemara kind of is talking it out more than maybe it could have just asked all the questions to get a full story of the understanding instead of just saying that they introduced the end letters that the letters should be at the end. Okay, I just want to say before we go further in the Gemara. So, okay, about not looking at the Torah, that we answered that Yeshayahu the king buried the ark. He said it's something interesting. Evidently, the Urim V'Tumim was the breastplate that had the letters of the tribes, and between all the letters, they added the Yehoisef, they added the letters, but to have all the letters that we should have. You should have all the letters of the tribes was on the breastplate, and when they would talk to the breastplate through the prophet of the system, that was the breastplate was used as a way to sort of say communicate to God, right? That was the breastplate that they had in the first temple, and it didn't really work. It only worked as up until sometime, I think, into Solomon's times. It was shaky even at the end when they weren't getting clear answers by David, I think. But either way, or maybe that's why David fired, so to say, demoted the high priest, because he wasn't getting answers from the Urim V'Tumim. But either way, the Urim V'Tumim, the breastplate, which had the name of God inside, had all the letters, and it would light up, and they communicated to God, the king or the prophets, they communicated to God via the breastplate. So why didn't they look at the breastplate to see the letters? So it says, it is brought down that Samuel and Saul asked, Erdif Achri Agdud Hazeh Hasigenu, and Hashem said, Redoif, Kitasik Tasigu. We asked if they should chase an enemy, and God says, chase them, pursue them, you'll catch them. And the word roidef, the word roidef means to chase. I'm not sure the question over here. From this is trying to prove that there was a long fay in the Urim V'Tumim to know that it's the end of the letter. Either way, there's all kind of questions how they couldn't figure out without the seers about Also, they had tefillin and other Torahs. That there's one thinking that there was only the long letters, and the ones that were given by the seers were the small letters, actually. He says also, they knew about the letters, they didn't know if they go in the beginning or the end. All right, either way, the seers came and helped us formulate that the end letters, that the long letters are at the end, not in the middle, unless there's an exception. But the letters were already there. But the question is, but at the end of the day, they instituted something. They said that the long letters have to go at the end, or the closed letters have to go at the end, and that a prophet is not allowed to teach something new. So again, the Gemara answers, they always had it. The thing is that they forgot about it. And because they forgot about it, the seers came and reminded them. Okay, so it means we have things in our tradition, and we have it till today. I mean, it's not like a revolutionary idea. The Mishnah has many times where the Mishnah discusses even things that happen in the temple. And they try to quote from the Skana Kohanim, the different people that were around. You have to remember the last years of the Second Temple were not easy years that people could say focus, is turmoil. So they had the people that Hananiah, Skana Kohanim would say that Ani Zoicher, I remember, I sit on my father's shoulders, I remember. They had things that they forgot in tradition of how it went. So that's why we have Edus. We have a whole Masechta about that. We have a whole tractate about the testimonies that people remember things, the things that people learned about questions, because not everything was always clear. You just want to say he has one more thing. There's another time. See, it's not so simple. Why couldn't they just find out? The Maharsha brings down that it's brought down, like it says in the Gemara Tamura, that in the Talmud, in the second tractate Tamura, it says, it's a famous thing that after Moshe passed away, right? Moshe passes away before the Jewish people enter the land. And in the days that they were mourning Moshe, there was such a mourning that they forgot huge chunks of Torah. And Joshua said, you can't ask God now. Like that's over, because Torah lo b'shemaimi. Means in theory, they could have asked God, we've got a whole bunch of laws. You just told us, Moshe just finished teaching us everything and we forgot them. So why don't you just remind us? So Moshe, they could have done the Urim V'Tumim, they could have asked the breastplate. They had many ways to ask God. But Joshua said no, because that wouldn't help. It's too late. Torah lo b'shemayim. Once God gave the Torah, it's down here. You have to figure it out. So Asniel ben Kenaz, the greatest Asniel ben Kenaz, who later became the Shofet after Yeshua, he was able to learn through the 13 attributes of Torah all the things that were forgotten. He taught it to Yeshua, and they reminded themselves of everything. So that's also that idea of forgetting. We want to find the source for that. Also, it doesn't mean that everyone forgot. Some people forgot. Okay, the Maharsha gets into the whole question of what does it mean that they forgot. Okay, let's continue. Rabbi Yirmiyah says like this, continuing of statements of Rabbi Yirmiyah, who told us in his first statement of the distance of Tveria to Chasam, which would show us the distance in what is the municipality space where you would read like an open city or closed city. So Rabbi Yirmiyah gave us the distance of a meal, which is from Tveria to here. So we're continuing with statements from Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, and again, we don't know if Rabbi Yirmiyah said or Rabbi Chia ben Abba said any of these statements. That Targum Shel Torah, right? Everyone knows Targum Onkelos. Targum is if you go to any Chumash and you open up a Chumash, you're going to have on the left-hand side the Targum Onkelos, which is the first, or one of the main translations, hey Bruce, one of the main translations of the Talmud. That's in Aramaic. Aramaic was the English of the times. It wasn't. Today we understand Lashon HaKodesh better than Aramaic. Aramaic is a very hard language to understand. It's built on the same principles of Hebrew. So, but those days they spoke Aramaic. Who wrote the Targum? So Onkelos, Onkelos the Convert. Omrei, he's the one who put together the special Targum, which is today. Rashi analyzes. Sometimes Rashi argues with the Onkelos. Onkelos himself was a convert. Mipi Rabbi Eliezer, and who did he learn from? He learned from Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer and Yeshua were the great sages of their time. Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol. Also, the teacher means he was the time of Rabbi Akiva, which means he would be the time post-destruction, or around the destruction of the Second Temple, before the uprising of Bar Kokhba. That was around the time of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua were the students of Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai. So they lived in the time of the destruction. And that's the Targum, that's the translation of the Onkelos on the Chumash. The Targum of the Nevi'im, of the prophets, was written by Yonasan ben Uziel. And he said it from Chagai, Zachari, Malachi. So Onkelos learned by Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua, the teachers of Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Yonasan ben Uziel, he learned from Chagai, Zachari, Malachi, which were the early prophets in the beginning of the Second Temple. Obviously, he didn't learn it from them because he lived 300 years after them, but he had a tradition from them, the translation of the prophets. When he translated, okay, Yonasan ben Uziel, it's brought down that the greatest student of Hillel the Elder was Yonasan ben Uziel. The smallest student, I'm not sure if it just means youngest or the lowest student, was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai became the Nasi. He's the head. He's the Patash HaGadol. He led the Jewish people in the times of the destruction of the temple. We all know Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He brought the Sanhedrin to Yavna. He moved it out of Jerusalem. He made a lot of institutions. The survival of the Jewish people during and post the second destruction was all due to the credit of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. His students were Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua. They set up the institutions. Rabbi Gamliel HaGadol. So these are the rabbis that learned under Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in Yavna, and from them came Rabbi Akiva and all the Mishnah and all the survival of Torah till Rebbe that wrote the Mishnayos, and then on to the time of the Talmud. So he's the lowest of the students of Hillel the Elder. The greatest of the students of Hillel the Elder is Yonasan ben Uziel. We don't know a lot about Yonasan ben Uziel, but he translated the prophets. V'nizdazda Eretz Yisrael arba amar parses al arba amar parses. And when he translated the prophets, Israel shook like an earthshake for a huge amount of space, for 400 parses. Why? Yatzabaskov Amra, a voice from heaven came out and said, Mihu zeh shegila sisarai livnei adam. Who dares to translate the sasari means the things that are sasum, the hidden passages, to man, because by translating the prophets, people would know too much from the prophets. We'll see what that means in a second. Let's learn Onkelos Ager. How did the Jewish people know? It's this crazy thing. Marsha writes. You have to remember them. There's a few giants of the commentaries on Talmud. One of those great giants, of course, is the Marsha. Marsha was a very fascinating person. He lived around the 1500s in Poland, and just a very wealthy person. He was self-sufficient. He had a huge yeshiva. There's the Pirush of the Marsha. There's the goddess of Marsha. Marsha he has a very mystical side to him. In Hasidim, the Baal Shem Tov, they're very connected to the Marsha. So the Marsha says, how did the Jewish people know Targum? How did they know Aramaic? What was this? What's the Jewish origin with the language Aramaic? Because what's interesting is when Yaakov Avinu, you have to remember who's our forefather. Avram comes from Macedonia, comes from that area. That's where they spoke Aramaic, over there in where Avram comes from, and especially Lavan. Lavan spoke Aramaic. That was the language that Lavan and Rivka spoke. When Yaakov went back, when Yaakov built his family in Haran, so the Marsha says that was the language he took back from them. The language at home, the English of the time was Aramaic. Lashon HaKodesh was the holy tongue. But the language that Yaakov and his children always knew was Aramaic. That's what it says in Marsha. He says, Targum Lashon Aramis. Targum is, the Rasha says, Targum is Aramaic. But Torah Nitna B'Lashon Kodesh. Torah was given the holy tongue, which is Ivris, known as Hebrew, right? The old Hebrew. And Shepirusha Misinai Targum from Sinai. We're going to learn that because Onkelos didn't translate it, he revealed the translation. The translation came down from Sinai as the Targum Onkelos, which is known as the Aramaic translation. Shayimur Golem Boy Mi Beis Avi Imam. The Jewish people were familiar with Aramaic from the house of their fathers, of their fathers' mothers, Lavan Harami. So their forefathers came from Lavan. Rivka is Lavan's brother. Leah and Rachel are Lavan's children. And the Jewish people knew Aramaic until the days of Ezra. Onkelos came and reinstated it again. That's fascinating, actually. Okay, let's go further. Let's see what Rabbi Evan Yisrael teaches us about Onkelos the Ger. There are different who it was Onkelos the Ger. Whenever we talk about, in Chassidus especially, about the sparks of the holy converts, throughout time. One of the converts that we talk about is Onkelos the Convert. So there's different opinions as to whether Onkelos the Convert can be identified as Aquila, who translated the Bible into Greek. It is related that Onkelos came from the family of the Roman emperor and subsequently converted and became a student for Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shua. Many stories are told about his conversion process and the power of persuasion he displayed. Everyone knows that his uncle, the Roman emperor, kept on sending legions of soldiers to bring him back, and he kept it every time they came. He converted the soldiers, so he had a strong sense of persuasion. According to the theory that Onkelos can be identified as Aquila, he translated the Bible into Greek and then, in turn, into Aramaic. The translation of Onkelos is considered to be accurate and in line with the Jewish tradition and halachot. Usually, the translation presents the literal meaning of the word, means we can know what the word is. Rashi, a lot of the time, agrees and quotes the Targum, with the exception of instances where he thought the simple meaning of the text did not follow the literal translation of the words. In these cases, he would translate the text in a more figurative manner. Onkelos' Aramaic translation is highly regarded by the sages, and when they would read from the Torah in synagogue, they would translate the text using this translation. So Onkelos, the convert, was so effective in Jewish tradition that when the rabbis would teach the Torah, they would teach it using his translation. This custom is observed to this day by the Yemenite Jews as the very last. At the very least, this translation is recommended in order to fulfill the practice of reading weekly portion twice in the original and once in the translation. We know Shnayim Mikra Targum, right? Every Friday we're supposed to review. Interesting enough, it's today's Hayom Yom. We're supposed to review the Parsha before Shabbos. How do we review the Parsha? Aaron does it weekly throughout the week, but others do it on Friday. Is that we do 2 times the literal translate, the Torah itself, and 1 time the Targum Onkelos. That's the tradition. Targum. Other commentaries elaborate that Onkelos translation is expanded upon in its meaning, the most detailed being Netina Lager. So there's a lot of people that go into helping us understand Onkelos better. One could look into Netina Lager. Okay. Who's Yonasan ben Uziel? The Gemara, so Reb Stein does like this. Very little is known of Yonasan ben Uziel, who is the greatest student of Hilda Elder. His greatest project is related here, was the translation of the books of prophets from Hebrew into Aramaic. It is not clear, till today we have Targum Yonasan ben Uziel. It's used all the time. It's not clear whether the translation is precisely, that is presently extended to its original, or whether it is merely based on that translation. Clearly, the extent version is a loose translation that includes much interpretation and explanation. Although there were previous translations into Greek, his translation was the first that also served as a type of interpretation and whose methodology was accepted for us by the sages of Israel. He was a preeminent scholar of his generation. And we find that Shammai the elder, meaning Hillel's colleague, the president of the court, would discuss halachic questions with him. Okay. What does it mean that Eretz Yisrael quaked? It's been suggested that this alludes to the fact that all the sages of Eretz Yisrael were greatly disturbed by this translation. I mean, it's not figuratively speaking that Israel shocked, but that the people in Israel were very upset, the rabbis. Various explanations have been offered for this. Why were people upset? Some suggest that it's not proper to reveal something that the Torah has hidden. So says Rabbeinu Hananel. Others suggest that there is a concern that people would devote less time and efforts to the study of the meaning of the verses and rely instead on the translation. So says the Tosas Reed. A third explanation is that there was a concern that there were concerns that people would no longer study the Bible itself and only the translation. Okay, either not to translate it good, not to learn it good enough, or not to learn it at all. Just read it out of the English. Okay, this is also why till today there's the debate about how much you want to simplify study. Today everyone's studying on a simple version, then people are forgetting the text. Till today, this is the question about text-based study. All right, so what did Yonasan ben Uziel respond? So in heaven they said to Yonasan ben Uziel, how dare you reveal these secrets? We're going to learn also the question was about the writings. Amr Yonasan ben Uziel, Raglav. Yonasan ben Uziel stood up on his feet and he said, Ani hu shigalisi, I wrote it. I translated the prophets. He took absolute credit for it. Your hidden things to man. It's known. I didn't do it for my own honor. I didn't do it for the honor of my family, my father. I did for the honor of Hashem. By having the proper translation, this will keep the peace. Because otherwise people are going to argue. The fire Nikreis hastimos. Rashi says they try to figure out what do the hidden verses mean. So he just translated and said this is the meaning of it. Again, this is a question till today that's discussed about how much we simplified the text and how much people are studying out of translations and not looking at the original text, which is it's a big shame in my opinion as well. He says like this. Again, Chagai and Zechariah obviously didn't teach it to Yonasan ben Uziel. He lived about 300 years before, but he had a tradition from them. Okay. What happened? So Yonasan ben Uziel is pen friendly. He's going to start continuing his project. He decided to start also translating into Aramaic the writings. So we know the Torah is divided into three categories. We have the Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses, the prophets. We have the writings like the Megillah, Eicha, Kehelah, Shir Hashirim, Daniel, right? Tehillim. That's in the Ksuvim. So he started to translate the Ksuvim. Yatsa Baskal Vomer, then God said to him, Dayecha, okay, slow down. My timim shem dispe kates Mashiach. Because in this book of Daniel is when Mashiach is going to come. It's hidden in there the days of Mashiach, and because of that, if you would translate again, this is very much connected to these week's parsha where Yaakov Avinu also wanted to give the kates Hayamim to his children, and God made him forget because that's a secret that God doesn't want revealed. Some secrets God is okay with. He accepted on the first answer. He said, "I revealed your secrets." He took his argument. When it comes to the kates of Mashiach, God told him, Dayacha, stop. In Kates Mashiach, Rashi says in Sefer Daniel. In the book of Daniel, that's why other religions, as we all know, also are always using the book of Daniel as a basis, because in the book of Daniel it has the future. And so the future that you could read in the book of Daniel, what we understand today is very limited. But if Yonasan ben Uziel would have translated Daniel into the proper translation, then everyone would have known the days of when Mashiach is coming. Rashi understands the revelation at the end found in the book of Daniel. Others suggest that it is alluded to in other books as well, in other words, Song of Songs. So says the Rashba. So the Rashba says that the Kates HaYamim is not just the days of when Mashiach is going to come, is not just in the book of Daniel, but also in the book of Song of Songs. So says the Rashba. Although Yonasan ben Uziel did not want to translate writings, if he could translate it in its entirety, a later sage translated it with exceptions of the book of Daniel, which the divine voice indicated should not be translated. So says the Rashban Ritva. So Yonasan ben Uziel could have just not translated the book of Daniel, or according to the Rashba, the book of Song of Songs, and translated the other ones. But he either was going to do a full project or no project. But there are others who came later who did put the Aramaic translation to these writings, but did not do it to Daniel because of God intervening and said, don't do that. According to other opinions, although it does say that we do have translation from Yonasan ben Uziel on the book of Mishle and Tehillim. So some say that the translation that we have Yonasan ben Uziel. So Rabbi Steinsaltz quotes that those are not Yonasan ben Uziel, but there are those who say it was Yonasan ben Uziel. He started to translate the book of Job, Mishle, and Tehillim, and then came out the voice from Hashem and said that stop. But also he quotes over here that others also agree with what Rabbi Steinsaltz writes over here, that it wasn't like the Rashba and Ritva, it wasn't Yonasan ben Uziel who translated those anyways. Okay, what is our Aramaic translation of the writings were composed by sages who lived after Yonasan ben Uziel. There are actually two such translations of the scroll of Esther, and is known as that a translation of the book of Job exists already in the time of the temple. According to the Gaonim, like Reb Hai Gaon, etc., that generation. However, these translations were not authorized or composed by leading Torah scholars, and consequently they are related, and consequently they related to them as more commentaries that do not necessarily always reflect the real meaning of the verse. Furthermore, most of these compositions were composed much later than the time of Yonasan ben Uziel. They were generally written in Eretz Yisrael and are based on Agadic medrash. It means they're not the literal translation, but more loose translations. Okay, now the Gemara continues. Do you really want to say that Targum, the translation that we have today of the Aramaic translation of the Torah, was written by Onkelos? Rab Ika bar Avin Rab Chananel Rav. Rab Ika, the son of Avin, in the name of Chananel, in the name of Rav, says, "My dechsi vayikru b'sefer Torah." What does it mean in Nehemiah? That says they read from the Torah, Alakim, Mifayrash, and the Pirush, the some seichel, and he put intellect, sense, v'yavinu b'mikra, and he understood the verse. Right? That's a verse out of Nehemiah. So what does that mean? So the Gemara breaks down. Vayikru b'sefer Torah, Salikim, Zamikra. They opened the book, they actually read the Mikra, the Chumash. Mifayrash, what does it mean? The explanation, the translation, that's the Targum. So we see clearly that they had already the Targum in the times of Nehemiah, which was 500 years before 400 years before 450 years before the time of Onkelos. Vayikra b'sefer Torah, Salikim b'sefer Ezra. Zeh Mikra Lashon Ivri Chumash. Mikra means the Hebrew, the Lashon HaKodesh. And I just want to say something. This pasuk, there is an opinion, I think Rashi seems to be of the opinion that Ezra and Nehemiah are one sefer. There's machlekes of the 24 books of the Torah, Kad, if Ezra and Nehemiah are one book or two books. So Rashi seems to say, although this book is set in Nehemiah, Rashi says it's set in the book of Ezra. So it could be Rashi's opinion that Ezra and Nehemiah are one book, and that Nehemiah wrote both Ezra and Nehemiah. Nehemiah and Ezra lived pretty much at the same time. So you have to remember just history. Ezra was kind of the Moshe Rabbeinu of his time. He's like Moshe Rabbeinu. He started everything anew. He's the one who built the second temple. He brought the Jews back from Babylonia after the first kind of Aliyah with Zerubbabel. He had to deal with all the intermarriage and other issues that he had to set up the Bris Hamona. He had to reinstitute the covenant. He made a covenant, reinstituted the covenant with the Jewish people. And Nehemiah was the muscle, to put it lightly. He came in with soldiers and armies from the Persian kings, where if people didn't want to listen to Ezra, Nehemiah dealt with it. And also Nehemiah had to deal with the nations around. The Sumerians were around, and they were not easy on the Jewish people. So there was a necessity for the survival of the Jewish people, that Nehemiah was there with the soldiers. Nehemiah seemingly went back there he was a servant of the king, he had to go back. But he came there to help Ezra. So he kind of wrote the book of Ezra. So according to some opinions, Nehemiah and Ezra is one book, all written by Nehemiah. Okay. What does it mean, v'sam seichel ela psukim? There's something else that people don't know. And I think I'm almost certain the chapters of the Chumash are not Jewish. That's a Christian edition. The ideas you have Perek Aleph Beis Gimel Dalet, the chapters of the Chumash is not something that's Jewish. We have the Parshias that end with Pei and Samach. If you like the sections, but the actual Prakim chapters was I think much later. But and the Jewish people adopted it because we use it till today. And the Psukim, but the verses they had. The Avinu b'mikra, these are psikitamim. What does it mean Avinu b'mikra? So it's interesting. Some seichel sense means the sense of the verses, the verses. Yavinu b'mikra is to understand the pasuk was the ta'amim. The ta'amim are the notes. Now, what does it mean to understand because if you properly know, Avi, I know you're a Balkora, if you properly know how to read the Torah, from the notes of how the notes sing into each other, you could see if it's comma going one way or the other way. If this word is part of the previous statement or part of the other statement. When you say Hashem, Hashem, what does it mean, psik tameh begavei? If the notes separate, it means that there's a separate statement. When the notes come together, then it helps us understand the meaning of the verse. So that's why psikitamim, the psikitamim is vayvinu b'mikra is the psikitamim. To understand what it's saying is the notes. Va'amrilei ela mesairis, and they say these are the traditions. Again, shachachum v'chazir yisadim. So they say, yes, Nehemiah and Ezra, we had the Targum. The Jewish people forgot it, and Onkelos came and reinstated it again. When we say we forgot it, doesn't mean that it was totally forgotten, but forgotten means forgotten by the masses. We see clearly through history of the Jewish people, in many times, starting from Noach, really, or first man, really, that information that certain people had wasn't always necessarily passed on to the masses. Adam knew about God, and everyone was serving idols. Noach and his three sons were on the boat, right? And people were out to lunch. They were building the Tower of Babylon. Shem lived past Yitzchak, but their information didn't mean anything to anyone. Avram was the only one who said, "What are you guys doing?" Avram took it. So Onkelos the Convert. Onkelos knew the translation. He said, "What do you mean? Publish it. If you know something, publish it. The people have to know the translation of the Chumash." How do we stop the psuk? Where does the verse stop? That was they had psuki tamim hanigunim kruim tamim. The notes, the songs are called tamim because also they give a meaning. He says over here the notes. He's going on over here about exactly. Alternatively, is referring to the differences between the ways certain words are written or pronounced. And not he quotes the Rashba saying it's a pronunciation of the words, not so much the notes. But I think it also means the notes as in the tunes. Hold on a second. Give me 1 second. Okay, so also we know that Targum Onkelos actually was written by nobody. It was written by it came down from Har Sinai, but it came down like an oral Torah, and the Jewish people forgot it, and it was reinstituted by Onkelos, who learned it from Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer. Also, we know that the notes, the Messiris means it says brought down over here. The Messiris of the notes, I mean, maybe others know. If someone analyzes the notes on the Chumash and the notes on the prophets and the notes on the writings, they're not the same. Like if you open up a Tehillim and try to use the tunes that we use in the Chumash in Tehillim, it would be very hard to read because they don't go together. The pattern and the style of the notes in the Chumash have a sing-song. And we also know the prophets have a certain way of also. We sing it when we say the Haftorah. But the notes on the Ksuvim are very complicated. So it's brought down because the notes were differently. There's a separate Masorah tradition of notes, the way they were in the Chumash, the way they were in the prophets, and the way they are in the writings. Again, to try to read maybe some people know it. I'm not familiar at all. I mean, I know the Haftarah because we read the Haftarah. So I know the Nevi'im and we know the Chumash, but the notes, we have one notes on the Ksuvim, we have the Megillah. The Megillah is also a little different, right? But even Tehillim doesn't go according to the notes of the Megillah. Okay, let's go a little further. Maybe others are more familiar with it, but it's complicated. Why, when the Torah was translated by Onkelos, the world didn't shake, and when it was translated by Yonas and Ben Azziel, the prophets, the world shook. So the Gemara answers, the Nevi'ah Ika Mili, the Mefarshin V'Ika Mili, the Mistamon. Because the Chumash was made to be translated. It means it's made to be understood everything. But there are parts in the prophets that are not made to be understood. The Stamon, they're made to be hidden. The Chsiv, like it says, Vayemuhu Yigdal HaMisped B'Yerushalayim, Ki Mispad Hadar Rimon B'Bikas at Megidon. Okay, there's a verse that says in Zechariah, like this, that on that day shall be a great mourning in Jerusalem, like the mourning of Hadar in the valley of Megidon. What are we talking about? So it's brought down, it doesn't say it over here, but it's brought down in the translations. This is a verse that's referring to when Mashiach ben Yosef, we don't know, that's a very complicated subject, but when the Mashiach ben Yosef is going to be killed. We know that there's a tradition by Jewish people that there's two Mashiachs. There's the two anointed ones. There's the Mashiach, the son of David. This all, again, connected to this week's Parsha. The Mashiach, the descendant of David, and the Mashiach, the descendant of Ephraim, of Joseph. That's why Yosef, Vahigash Yosef, in this week's Parsha, it's Yosef and Yehuda that go against each other because they're basically the two pillars of the Jewish people. And there's a Mashiach who's the descendant of Yosef, and the Mashiach, the descendant of David. The tradition is that the Mashiach ben Yosef is going to die in war. That's why the Rabbeinu, the Or Chaim says, I think, that when we say Ki Lishuascha Kivinu Kol Yom every day in davening, for his salvation we wait every day, we're supposed to think about the Mashiach ben Yosef, because he's going to have a hard time in his battles. it's not clear because the Rambam doesn't mention Mashiach ben Yosef. It's not clear halachically how we understand Mashiach ben Yosef. But this verse in Zechariah is referring to Mashiach ben Yosef. And he says that when Mashiach ben Yosef is going to die, the Metzudas David says that this is referring to Mashiach ben Yosef. So he says that when he dies, it's going to be a great mourning in Jerusalem, like the mourning of Adardiam in the valley of Megiddo. What does that mean? So he says, let's just see, Rabbi Steinzalt says, Rabbeinu Hananel writes that this is meant to generalize. In other words, the most of the matters discussed in Torah are clear, like Rabbi Yaakov Emden says. Indeed, the language of the Torah itself is generally not obscure, and most verses can be understood in their plain sense. In contrast, the book of the prophets are often written in parables, and each parable must be explained in its content and revealed. Content revealed. A translation, therefore, is not merely rendering of the material into a different language, but also explanation. This is the fact that the nature of the translation attributed to Yonah ben Uziel that has come down to us is why his translation kind of shocked the world, because there is parts of the prophets that are not clear. And Rabbi Yosef explains. So what's the verse mean about Mashiach ben Yosef? If there wasn't a targum of Yonah ben Uziel, the high crow lay down in my comma. I wouldn't have no idea what Zechariah means. What's it mean? The Achav bar Amri, Diktal Yosei Hadadraman ben Tarvimoin, Beramat Gilad, Ukimisbida de Yeshio ben Amon, Diktal Yosei Parechagira, Begivas Megiddo. So Rabbi Yosef, who it's brought down because he was blind, so he needed the translations. He couldn't really see. He had to rely on other translations. So he said what it's referring to is that when Mashiach ben Yosef dies, it's going to be the mourning like the Jewish people suffered when Achav, which was not a good king, the son of Omri, who was killed by Hadad Rimon ben Tavrithmon, which means in the war of Ramat Gilad by Hadad ben Hadad. That's just a name for him, Hadad ben Hadad. And like the eulogy of Yashio, the great righteous king of Yehuda, that was killed by Pare Nechei, by Pare Chagira, Pare the limping one, Pare the one who had a limp, and he was killed in Megiddo. So he's saying again, this is what it means that the Agada of the Gemara in the Medrash of the Gemara is hidden a lot of hidden things. Why? What's this all mean? Kind of seems to go over our head, but obviously there's a lot over here because we're talking about two different kings. Achav is a horrible king. And I mean, he was a powerful king, but he was a horrible king. As far as he's mentioned last, we learned in Sanhedrin, not having a portion of the world to come. We learned about him. And Yeshua was the great righteous king. And so when Mashiach ben Yosef dies, it's kind of going to hit the spectrum on both sides. The wicked are going to be crying, and the righteous are going to be crying. It's going to be, you have a disaster where sometimes it's that, some people are upset, that some people take comfort in other people's pain, because it works for their agenda. When Mashiach ben Yosef is going to die, it's going to hurt everyone. The people that are followers of Achav and the people that are followers of Yeshayahu, kind of painting the picture that we're in now. When you have both an anti-religion sentiment, not to get into politics, but also an anti-Semitic sentiment out there, kind of mixing different groups. Okay, Rashi says, "Ilmali turgama daikra shlemetzina b'chol Nikreis hesped ladar dimon v'bikas Megiddo." Because Rabbi Yosef didn't understand the Megiddo had nothing to do with the eulogy of Hadar Dimon. Yonasan Targum l'shnei. So Yonasan explained that there are two separate eulogies: Hadar Dimon b'Ramat Gilad and Yeshayahu b'Bikat Megiddo. Sefer Melachim. Even this Rashi is cryptic. What's Rashi saying? And just to go off topic for a second, what's Rashi saying? Rashi's saying that without having Targum Yonasan, we would be confused. What are you confused? You're mixing the righteous and the wicked, right? You have Achav and Yeshio. It's like Rivka. What happened to Rivka? Rivka goes in and her stomach she's seeing the child's mixed up. He's going to Avodah Zarah, he's going to the yeshiva. So you understand, what does Shem say? You have two people inside of you. You have Esav that wants to go to Avodah Zarah, and you have Yaakov that wants to go to the yeshiva. So you have a fight, they're going to fight, but it's not confusion. What bothered her was the confusion. So too, Yonasan ben Uziel says over here, Zechariah is not referring to a confused eulogy. You can't be mourning Achav and mourning Yeshayahu in the equal way. It doesn't make sense. And now let's have to do with Mashiach ben Yosef. So when he talks about Mashiach ben Yosef, it means he spreads it out a bit. That those people who are the followers of Achav are going to be crying for Achav, that there's going to be pain from the side of Achav, and those of the falls of Shia are also going to be crying. That's what kind of disaster it's going to be for the Jewish people from the right and the left. And everyone, Amav and Yavin. Okay, let's continue. Another pasuk, which is a very famous pasuk quoted many times in Chassidus. It says like this: "Vereisius Daniel," that Daniel says, "I saw levadi." I mean, there was a vision. We have to remember something. Daniel, who lived in the time of Daniel is the court Jew, and he lives in the time of really before the story of Esther, but he's also hinted in the story of Esther. He's there, Achashverosh's advisor as well. And so then he changes his name. So Daniel says, I saw the vision Levadi. Samara, the vision. V'hanoshim asher hayuimi, with other people that were with me. Lo yiro Samara, they did not see the vision. Av l'charod gedola nafla aleim, but they got a chill of fear. V'yivrechu v'hechavei, and they fled to hide themselves. So that's what Daniel says. That he saw vision. He saw it, they didn't see it, but they got scared. Who are these people? Again, this Rabbi Yirmiyah, the name Rabbi Barav is Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi. The Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, again, those the end prophets of the second temple, they kind of lived in the beginning of the second temple and throughout the diaspora in Persia or Babylonia. They were with Daniel. They're part of the Chevra. They didn't see what Daniel saw, but they got a shiver. So the problem is that they were, like we learned about this in Sanhedrin. They were greater than him in one way, and he was greater than them in another way. Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi were greater than Daniel because they were actually prophets. He was not a prophet. Daniel was not a prophet. He was greater than them. He saw and they didn't see. So a visionary, a person who sees, and a prophet are not the same things. But you have to remember also their jobs are different. Someone who sees something. That's why Daniel couldn't be translated. The prophets were translated. The Targum was given to the prophets, but wasn't given to Daniel. Why? Because Daniel was a visionary. Not everything you see you have to tell. Sayyid Hashem L'Reyav, right? It says that there's secrets. Daniel was the secret keeper. He saw everything. He saw the destruction. He saw every kingdom. He saw Rome. He saw the Greeks. These are all after him. He describes it in the vision of the gold, the silver. He saw the rise of Ishmael. He quotes it all in Daniel. But he wasn't a prophet. He was not meant to give over the message. And therefore, it stayed cryptic. And therefore, the God, the heavens said, stop, do not translate Daniel. Because there's things they are not made to be given over. But the Chagai and Zechariah and Malachi are prophets. Prophets' job is to give over the word of God. So they were greater than him because they were prophets, but they didn't see what he saw. So Rashi says, they said prophecy to the Jewish people, as messengers of God. That's what a prophet is. You're a messenger of God to give over the word of God. He was never sent as a prophet. He saw things. He knew things. And there's a certain, so why do we know about it? Why does he put it into writing? There's a certain comfort that for the Jewish people to know, right? Why do we have to know about Ketz HaYamim? Why do we have to know about that there is an end day that we don't know about, and we know that no one's allowed to know about it? And Yaakov wants to reveal it, and it's taken from him for momentarily when he knows that he's not supposed to reveal it. And Yonasan ben Azil wants to translate Daniel, and God says, stop, don't translate Daniel. There's a certain comfort in knowing something exists, even if you don't know what it is. And so Daniel writes everything. Everything that's going to happen is written in Daniel. The Rebbe spoke to them, and the Rebbe came out with a campaign for the letters of the Sefer Torah for the children. The Rebbe quoted a verse of Daniel, Holocaust of the Sefer, that there's going to be a big war with a big destruction, and the people who are written in the Sefer Torah are going to survive. And the Rebbe really went on that campaign when there was the nuclear threat from Iraq. So you have a lot of things that these are things that are quoted 3,000 years before. There's a lot of things that there's a comfort, even if you don't know what it is, but to know that it was seen and shown, and it's all according to a plan. So it says this: the Tiris Evan writes that Daniel is not a prophet at all. Meaning to say, Rashi seems to say, not that he wasn't a prophet, but he wasn't sent to give over a message, but he says he just wasn't a prophet. as we do not find that God himself spoke to him. Not just that he didn't give over a message, but that God never spoke to him, but only that certain visions were revealed to him. Again, this is the opinion of the Torah Evan, by way of an angel. Most of the early authorities, however, maintain that Daniel is counted among the prophets. So says the Tosfos Rosh, as a prophet is one who is sent by God with a message to the Jewish people, regardless of how that message is communicated to him. So the Tosfos Rosh, after see the text inside, says that he was given a message, and it was meant to be given over, even if it's to remain cryptic to the Jewish people, even if God didn't speak, but he was a prophet. Now the Gemara asks the famous question: if they didn't see anything, why did they get scared? So the Gemara answers the famous answer: here we have the concept of our inner mazel, or our outer mazel. We know that what the consciousness of our soul is a very small, very, very small part of our soul. The part that we function, our brains, our intellect, our emotions, that's a very small part of the character of our soul. There's what's called the mazel. The mazel is the outer part of the soul that doesn't go into the body in any way. It's not just that it doesn't fit into the body, but it has powers that's beyond our own consciousness and awareness. But it triggers like electrons. It gives ideas. So the mazel, the outside soul, saw the vision that they didn't see. So they didn't see anything, but their mazel did see it. And therefore they gave them a shudder, even though they couldn't identify why they were scared. Sometimes when a person says, I have an intuition, or I'm scared about something, it's not nothing. It could be coming from your outer mazel that knows what you don't know, because it has a much greater awareness, much greater vision, much greater understanding of the reality. And what you know is only a small bit that's revealed, that's conscious to you. And sometimes your outer mazel gives messages, and that's why the Baal Shem Tov says the famous idea that's the idea of a baskol. Why are these voices that come out from heaven every day tell people to do tshuva, repent? What's the point? You can't hear them. What's the point of a baskol if you can't hear it? Because your mazel hears it. And therefore, the Baal Shem Tov teaches that if a person gets a feeling of tshuva and you can't identify where that feeling comes from, you should know that it's coming from your mazel. Your mazel knows that you have to do tshuva, and it's sending you a message. Come on, return, do your job. My time yivus, the Gemara says, the Rashi says, they're very scared. And they hid. Rashi calls it the sar. But in Chassidus, it explains it's the outer part of your soul. Ravina, just to finish this piece of Gemara, this finishes this sugya. Ravina says, Shema Mina, from this we learn. Haiman de mivis, if you get scared, what should you do? You should know that there's a fear that you can't see, but your outer soul is identifying with. So what should you do? Nikreis, say the Shema Yisrael. You feel something come over you, you can't identify, just say the Shema Yisrael. What about you're in a place that you can't say Shema halachically? It's a dirty place. It's not a place appropriate for saying Shema Yisrael. So so you should walk out 4 cubits out of that dirty place, so you could say the Shema Yisrael. And if you can't, so leimahachi. This itself is a deep idea. You should say, so to say, to this feeling that Iza Tavi Tabache Shemina Minayu, that the goat in the slaughterhouse is fatter than I am. Like if you feel like a spirit is coming to you and trying to bother you, you say, you're wasting your time. There's better picking somewhere else. The goat in the slaughterhouse has more fat. Go bother someone else. Basically, it's telling the spirit to go find someone else to nudge. Lincha vidlag, you should jump. So Reb Sheinzal says, some explain this figuratively to mean that if one feels certain weakness in his body, he should recite Shema, meaning he should begin with the prayer to God. He should then distance himself from his current location, which means he should change his ways. So the idea is, the part of this Rimonim says, doesn't just mean if you find that yourself dirty, not in a dirty place, but you're not the person, you find that there's needs that you have to make changes. So like Moshe says, Asuri Mikan, the Karav Lisham, you have to go away. So go away 4 paces from your reality. And he should say the goat in the slaughterhouse is fatter than I am, which means he should attach less importance to his body and physical needs, which is the goat in the slaughterhouse, and start focusing on your ruchnius and your spirituality. Okay, everyone, I got a little less further than I would like, but holiday season. So I just want to wish everyone a good Shabbos. And I hope you had a wonderful Hanukkah. Take care. Laila Tov.
Rabbi, will we have classes tomorrow?
I'm going to post that. There's no classes tomorrow night.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, Laila Tov.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Laila Tov.